Welcome, friends, to a night unlike any other, where we peel back the velvet of high society and step quietly into champagne-filled ballrooms, candlelit penthouses, and the lingering echoes of betrayal. This is a world where revenge wears silk, where broken hearts return draped in diamonds, and where silence often thunders louder than any apology. Tonight, you'll witness the rise of a black woman they once said wasn't classy enough, now walking past them in a gown worth more than their judgment ever was. But before we begin, treat yourself to a seat that makes you feel powerful. Pour a glass of whatever feels right. Hit that like and subscribe if you crave stories of elegance, strength, and poetic justice, and no pressure. No curses, just atmosphere. Drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from, what city, what time. Every message from around the world makes me feel like I'm sharing these tales by firelight with a global circle of curious souls. Now, dim the lights, let soft music hum in the background, and lean in close, because tonight's journey is a return no one expected and a reckoning in heels. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and ink-stained lecture notes, but I barely noticed. Back then, every moment felt electric when Derek was around. He wasn't just another guy on campus, he was the guy. The one with an easy smile that seemed to light up even the grayest Indiana morning and a knack for knowing when to slip me a handwritten note during those long, soul-draining economics lectures. "Don't forget to breathe, Simone," his notes would say in that sharp, slanted script of his, folded into origami swans or little paper airplanes that would land on my desk with precision. And somehow, every time I opened one, it felt like he'd cracked my chest open and read my anxiety like a well-worn book. By sophomore year, I was hopelessly, stupidly in love with him. He would show up outside my dorm at 2 a.m. with hot chocolate during midterms, his hoodie pulled up against the biting wind, and whisper, "I figured my girl could use a rescue mission." And oh, how I believed it, that I was his girl, his forever. When Derek proposed on that old wooden bench where we'd had our first real conversation, I thought the moment was ripped straight from a Nicholas Sparks movie. He'd saved for months, skipping meals and working double shifts at the bookstore just to buy me a modest solitaire diamond that sparkled with all the promise in the world. The wedding was a blur of laughter, tears, and love so thick it felt like we could bottle it up and live on it for years. Derek's grandmother slipped her pearl earrings into my hand moments before I walked down the aisle. "Something old," she'd whispered with a smile. Derek stood there waiting, his eyes glassy as if he couldn't believe I'd really said yes. And for the first few years, we were invincible. Weekend farmers' market trips became our ritual. Derek would buy me sunflowers every Saturday, because he said they reminded him of how I lit up a room. We had our favorite Italian restaurant where the owner knew our order: rigatoni for me, extra parmesan for him. Sundays were for lazy mornings, sprawled across the couch in pajamas, planning the house we would someday build and the kids who'd fill it with laughter. But cracks don't always start with an earthquake. Sometimes they creep in slowly, like ivy growing across brick. It was in year 5 that the shift began. Derek started working late, building the real estate empire. "Babe," he'd say, kissing my forehead on his way out the door. The sunflowers stopped coming. The date nights became rare, and even when they did happen, he was glued to his phone, eyes darting to notifications with a smile that I couldn't place. I told myself it was a phase, that marriages went through rough patches. But something in my gut screamed otherwise. Then came the new cologne. Spicy, bold, nothing like the clean, woodsy scent I was used to. The first time I caught it on his jacket, I thought maybe he just wanted a change. But then there were the credit card statements. Expensive restaurants I'd never heard of. Wine bars and boutiques in parts of town we never visited together. "Client dinners," he said curtly when I asked. "Why are you interrogating me like I'm a criminal? Simone, you're paranoid." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew. The night it all unraveled. The October air was sharp and cool as I drove home from the grocery store. I passed by Donovan's Steakhouse, Derek's favorite spot, and there it was, his sleek black sedan parked outside, gleaming under the amber streetlight. My pulse hammered in my ears. I could have kept driving, could have gone home, made dinner, and pretended I hadn't seen it. But my hands had a mind of their own, turning the wheel into a side street. I parked across from the restaurant and sat there, clutching the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Don't do this, Simone, I told myself. There's probably an explanation. A last-minute client meeting. Something innocent. But when I saw them through the window, all hope disintegrated. There he was, my Derek, seated across from a woman I'd never seen before. Blonde hair cascaded in soft waves over her shoulders. Her petite frame draped in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Derek's hand rested over hers on the table, thumb caressing her knuckles like he used to do with me. When she laughed at something he said, he leaned across the table and kissed her. Not the kind of quick, friendly peck you give an old friend. No, this was slow, tender, familiar. The world seemed to go silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat that I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't stop watching. For an eternity, I sat there, gripping the door handle, my mind replaying every memory, every whispered promise. The man who once swore I was the only woman he'd ever love was holding another woman like she was his world. And I, his wife of 6 years, was nothing more than a shadow outside the glass. When they finally left, Derek's arm was draped around her waist. Protective, possessive, the way he used to hold me when crossing a busy street or walking through a crowd. I waited until his car disappeared down the road before driving home in a daze. That night, I didn't scream or throw things like I imagined I would. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain in the wood until the sound of his keys in the door snapped me out of my trance. "Who is she?" I asked softly as he stepped inside. Derek froze. For the briefest moment, panic flashed across his face. And then, just like that, it was gone, replaced with a mask of calm detachment. "Her name's Brittany," he said casually, like he was talking about the weather. Something inside me cracked. "Brittany? Are you in love with her?" The steadiness in my own voice surprised me. Derek met my gaze, unflinching. "She's everything you're not, Simone. She's fun, spontaneous, doesn't nag me about spending time together. She makes me feel alive again." His words were like glass shards slicing into my chest. And as I packed a bag later that night, moving out of the home we'd built together, one thought kept echoing in my mind. I thought I was his forever. Turns out I was just a placeholder. The morning after I walked out, the sunlight felt cruel. It poured into Carmen's guest room through gauzy curtains, illuminating the suitcases piled in the corner, my crumpled jacket on the floor, and the faint outline of tears drying on my cheeks that I hadn't cried in front of Derek. Not when I zipped up the overnight bag. Not when I walked past the photo of us in Santorini, the one where we were laughing under a pastel sunset. His arm draped over my shoulders like he would never let go. But alone, with the smell of lavender from Carmen's detergent clinging to her spare sheets, my dam broke. I pressed a pillow over my face to muffle the sobs and wished I could scream loud enough to empty all the hurt from my chest. "Simone!" Carmen's voice was tentative as she knocked. "I made coffee." I stayed silent. Moments later, the door creaked open and she padded in barefoot, carrying a steaming mug. "You need to eat something, or at least drink this." I forced myself upright, clutching the mug between trembling hands. "He didn't even flinch, Carm," I whispered hoarsely. When I asked him about her, he said her name like she was nothing, like I was nothing. Carmen's eyes darkened, and she crouched in front of me, resting her hands gently on my knees. "No, don't you dare let that man rewrite the truth in your head. He's the one who's nothing." I wanted to believe her, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Derek with Brittany. Her hand in his, that smile I hadn't seen in years lighting up his face. For the first week, I existed on autopilot. I went to work, smiled when necessary, answered emails, attended meetings. No one at the office knew. I wore my best neutral face, the one I'd perfected during grueling client presentations. But at night, when I returned to Carmen's, I collapsed into the same hollow routine. Shower, change into Carmen's oversized t-shirts, scroll through Instagram until I couldn't take it anymore. And Derek's feed, God help me, I couldn't stop looking. 3 days after I left, he posted a photo of Brittany in a silk dress, perched on a balcony with a flute of champagne. The caption read, "Some souls just set you free. Hashtag blessed, hashtag authenticity." The comments stung. "She's gorgeous, bro. Upgrade. You two are fire. Love wins." Couple goals, red heart fire. I tossed my phone across the room. But the next night, I picked it up again. A week later, Brittany joined in on the public performance. Her Instagram stories were a rotating highlight reel. Derek presenting her with a bouquet so massive she could barely see over it. Derek feeding her a bite of chocolate soufflé in some dimly lit restaurant. Derek walking hand in hand with her on a beach, the ocean frothing around their ankles. And always that same smile on his face. The one that used to be for me alone. I thought I'd seen the worst of it. But then came the Malibu trip. Photo after photo. Brittany in a white bikini, looking effortlessly flawless, laughing as Derek twirled her in the surf. Derek carrying her bridal style, his sunglasses catching the sunset, like some movie star groomed at a private dinner on the sand, candles flickering, captioned, "Happiness looks like this. Hashtag forever love." I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the ease of his replacement. The way he had taken 6 years of memories and swept them off the table like crumbs. And worse still, people cheered him on. Mutual friends left comments that twisted the knife deeper. "Never seen you this happy, D. She's a queen. Real recognize Real. You deserve this, man." The whispers started soon after. The grocery store. In line at the bank. Little glances, hushed voices behind manicured hands. "That's her. The one Derek left. Well, look at Brittany. No wonder. You know, they say she was too uptight, always nagging him." I wanted to disappear. Instead, I retreated. For 2 months, Carmen's guest room became my prison and sanctuary all at once. I turned down invitations, ignored texts from colleagues, worked long hours to avoid the hollow evenings. But late at night, I would lie awake, Derek's words looping in my head like a curse. "She's everything you're not." Was I really so unbearable? So unworthy of love that he didn't hesitate to discard me? One evening, Carmen barged in unannounced. She was holding a bottle of wine in one hand and my laptop in the other. "Enough. I have to finish this project." "No, Simone." Her voice cracked like a whip. "You've been punishing yourself for months. And for what? For his failure to be a decent human being." I stared at her, blinking. "You are brilliant. You are beautiful. And Derek? He's a coward who gave up a diamond for a cheap piece of glass." Her words sliced through the fog I'd been living in. Carmen wasn't done. She plopped the wine bottle on the nightstand and crossed her arms. "You're letting him win, you know that? Every hour you spend hiding in here, he wins." The next day, I booked a therapy session at IT. Felt ridiculous at first. Sitting in Dr. Johnson's softly lit office, clutching a box of tissues. But session after session, she chipped away at the poison Derek had left behind. "This wasn't about your worth, Simone," she said one day. "It was about his emptiness." Something shifted in me. Little by little, I started reclaiming myself. Not for Derek. Not to prove anything to Brittany. For me. I joined a gym. Not to get revenge body ready, but to remember how strong I was. I bought new clothes. Not designer gowns like Brittany's, but sharp, confident pieces that made me feel like I belonged in my own skin again. When I walked into work one morning and learned I'd been promoted to regional marketing director, the youngest in company history, I didn't think of Derek once. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not the brittle smile I used to wear in front of Carmen. A real one. And in that moment, I promised myself, he may have taken my past, but he won't get my future. The autumn air had an edge to it that night, a crispness that seeped into my coat and curled icy fingers around my ribs. I tightened my scarf as I gripped the steering wheel, the grocery bags rustling softly in the passenger seat. The car hummed as I drove through the familiar streets of our neighborhood. No, his neighborhood now. It had been weeks since I'd last seen Derek in person. Weeks since I'd walked out of our home, my wedding ring burning a mark into my palm as I clenched it too tightly. I hadn't planned on seeing him. Not tonight. Not like this. But fate, or whatever cruel hand was guiding my life, had other plans. As I turned onto Maplewood Drive, My gaze flicked left toward Donovan's Steakhouse, the same one where Derek used to beg me to celebrate every anniversary. Its windows glowed warm against the black night. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for one car. His car. The sleek black sedan I'd washed on Sunday mornings. The one I'd sat in for countless road trips. The one I'd driven home from the dealership with him as he beamed like a boy on Christmas morning. It was parked near the entrance, gleaming under the yellow streetlight. I shouldn't stop. I knew I shouldn't stop. But my foot eased off the gas as if of its own accord that I pulled into a side street, killing the engine. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might burst through my ribcage. He's probably with clients, I told myself. It's a Tuesday. He said he had out-of-town buyers tonight. This could be perfectly innocent. But a sour taste coated my tongue, thick and bitter. I crossed the street and ducked behind a row of parked cars until I had a clear view through the steakhouse's front window. And then I saw them. Derek. Brittany. She was sitting across from him at a corner table, her blonde hair falling like a golden waterfall over one shoulder. A tiny diamond sparkled on her delicate wrist, catching the light every time she gestured. He was laughing. Not the polite, strained chuckle I'd gotten used to in our last year together, but a real, full-bodied laugh. His shoulders relaxed. His face lit up like I hadn't seen in years, and then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his my breath caught. I told myself to turn around, to walk away and leave whatever this was behind me. But my feet felt rooted to the asphalt. As I stood there, hidden in the shadows, Derek leaned in and said something that made her laugh. A soft, melodic sound that carried even through the glass. Then he kissed her. Not a friendly peck. Not the kind of quick brush you give someone in public. This was intimate, familiar. His hand cupped her face, thumb grazing her cheek as if she were something fragile and precious. That was my place. My mind screamed. That used to be me. I don't know how long I stood there, watching. Minutes? Hours? It felt like time itself had frozen, trapping me in this sick, slow-motion scene. When they finally rose to leave, Derek draped his arm around her waist. Protective, possessive, the same way he used to hold me when crossing a busy street or guiding me through a crowded room. I stayed hidden as they walked out, laughing softly, their figures disappearing into the night like ghosts. Only when the sound of his car engine faded into silence did I realize I was crying at Carmen's apartment later. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched mug of tea. My coat was still buttoned, scarf wrapped tight around my neck like a noose. You saw him, Carmen said quietly, sliding into the chair across from me. I nodded. With her? Another nod. What did you do? I let out a shaky breath. Nothing. I just watched. Carmen reached across the table, curling her fingers around mine. You're stronger than I would have been. I wasn't strong. I felt like glass, thin, brittle, moments from shattering. When Derek came home later that night, the scent hit me first. Perfume. Sweet and cloying. Not mine. Hers. He tossed his keys onto the counter, humming under his breath. Who is she? My voice was calm. Too calm. Derek froze mid-step, the color draining from his face. Simone? Who is she? For a moment, panic flickered in his eyes. Then he straightened, his expression hardening into something cold. Her name's Brittany. He said it casually, like he was talking about the weather. Something inside me snapped. How long? 3 months. 3 months. While I had been planning our anniversary dinner, buying him his favorite shirts, supporting his dreams, he'd been building a whole other life. Are you in love with her? He didn't hesitate. She's everything you're not, Simone. My stomach churned. She's fun, spontaneous, doesn't nag me about spending time together. She makes me feel alive again. That night, I packed my bags. Not because I was weak, not because I was defeated, because I finally understood. The man I thought I loved didn't exist anymore. Maybe he never had. As I shut the door behind me, the house seemed to exhale, a hollow, empty sound that echoed in my chest. I didn't look back. The first days after leaving Derek felt like walking through a dream where every detail was sharp enough to cut. The house key still pressed into my palm even though I didn't know why I'd brought it. I wasn't going back. I told myself that over and over as I lay awake in Carmen's guest room, staring at the ceiling until dawn seeped through the blinds. Each time my phone buzzed, a sliver of hope flickered in my chest before dying out. Derek never called, never texted. He didn't try to stop me. And somehow, that hurt worse than the betrayal itself. At first, I thought he might keep our separation private. That maybe, despite it all, he would let me grieve in peace. But Derek had other plans. 3 days after I left, his Instagram came alive like fireworks on the 4th of July. The first photo hit me like a punch to the gut. Brittany. She stood on a balcony overlooking the ocean, wearing a silk robe that clung to her delicate frame. Her golden hair was swept up in a careless bun, and she held a champagne flute in one manicured hand. The caption read, "Some souls set you free. #authenticity, #forever blessed." The comments poured in, "She's stunning, bro. Upgrade for real. Happiness looks good on you. Couple goals, fire, red heart." My stomach lurched. I told myself not to look again. The next night, I was scrolling through my phone in the dark. My thumb hovered over his profile picture for a long, trembling moment before I tapped. The floodgates opened, Derek and Brittany on a candlelit rooftop, glasses clinking. Brittany holding a bouquet of roses so enormous it obscured her face. Derek in a crisp white shirt, his arms slung casually around her waist as they posed in front of a sleek sports car, and her captions. God, her captions. "When a man treats you like a queen, you never settle for less. Manifested this love." Sparkles dizzy. I felt sick. Carmen noticed the change before I said a word. "You've been quiet today?" she murmured, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me the following morning. I stared at the food but couldn't bring myself to eat. He's posting her everywhere." I whispered. Carmen's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "He's parading her, Carm. Vacations, jewelry, fancy dinners. It's like he wants the whole world to see how perfect they are." The worst was yet to come. 2 weeks later, Derek and Brittany went to Malibu. I know because Brittany documented every moment for the world to admire. Photo after photo. Brittany in a designer bikini, her skin glistening as Derek lifted her into his arms and carried her through the surf like something out of a romance novel. Brittany at a private beachside dinner, laughing as Derek tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, their table glowing in the sunset. Brittany lounging on the deck of a yacht, a diamond bracelet winking on her wrist. I stopped eating for 2 days. The comments from our mutual friends cut deeper than glass. "Never seen you this happy, Derek. She's perfect for you, man. Finally found your person. Cheers to real love." It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. It was the humiliation. Every post felt like Derek was twisting a knife into my back, showing me, and everyone else, just how easily I'd been replaced. I deleted Instagram. But the whispers still found me. At the coffee shop. In the office elevator. "She's the one Derek left, isn't she? No wonder. Look at Brittany. She's flawless." I heard Simone was cold, always nagging him. Men need excitement. Each comment clawed at my chest until I thought I'd bleed out from the inside. Carmen tried to reach me, but I couldn't let her in. I started working longer hours, burying myself in spreadsheets and marketing campaigns. Anything to avoid the echoing silence of my own thoughts. But every night, when I finally lay down in Carmen's guest room, Derek's voice came back to me. "She's everything you're not." I tried to remember the Derek who used to buy me sunflowers every Saturday. The Derek who'd proposed on a park bench, hands shaking as he slipped the ring on my finger. But all I could see now was Derek as he was in those photos. Smiling at Brittany like she was his sun and he was a planet caught in her orbit. And I, once his world, was nothing more than cosmic dust. One night, Carmen burst into the room without knocking. "That's enough." Her voice was sharp, slicing through the darkness like a blade. "You're letting him win, Simone. Every hour you spend crying over him, he wins." I shook my head, staring at my hands. "You don't understand. He's moved on. He's happier without me." "Do you really believe that?" Carmen demanded, crouching in front of me. "Do you think a man who needs to plaster his happiness all over social media is actually happy?" I didn't answer. "Simone, you're not boring. You're not replaceable. You're a diamond, and Derek's too blind to see it." Her words stayed with me long after she left the room. And for the first time in months, a flicker of something, rage, maybe, or resolve, burned in my chest that he doesn't get to define me anymore. At first, I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken, ringed with the hollow shadows of too many sleepless nights. The loose sweatshirt swallowed her frame, hanging limp like armor she no longer had the strength to carry. This was the version of me Derek had left behind. A shell, cracked and hollow, still trembling from the aftershocks of betrayal, and God help me, I was tired of her. You can't keep doing this. Carmen's voice was quiet but firm as she stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me scroll aimlessly on my phone. I didn't look up. Doing what? Letting him live rent-free in your head. She crossed the room and yanked the phone out of my hands before I could react. Simone, you're brilliant. You're beautiful. And you're sitting here wasting away because of a man who's not even worth the dirt on your shoes. Carmen? No, she knelt in front of me, gripping my hands so tightly I could feel the pressure in my bones. Derek didn't break you. He doesn't get to win. That night, I signed up for therapy. IT felt strange at first, sitting in Dr. Johnson's softly lit office while she watched me with calm, kind eyes. Why are you here, Simone? She asked gently. I don't know who I am anymore, I whispered, and then the dam broke that I told her everything. About the 6 years of love I thought were unshakable, about the flowers that stopped coming, about the blonde in the steakhouse window, about how Derek's voice still echoed in my skull. She's everything you're not, doctor. Johnson listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, her expression unreadable. When I finally fell silent, she leaned forward. Simone, she said softly, his betrayal isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of his character. Something shifted in me that day. It wasn't a bolt of lightning or a cinematic epiphany. Just a spark. A tiny ember in the ashes where my self-worth used to burn, and I decided to fan it until it became a fire. The first step was the gym. I didn't go for revenge, didn't picture Derek's face as I pounded out miles on the treadmill. I went because I needed to feel strong again. Every drop of sweat felt like poison leaving my body. Every sore muscle reminded me that I was still alive, still here, still fighting. The second step was my wardrobe. Gone were the baggy sweatshirts and yoga pants I'd been hiding in. I invested in pieces that hugged my curves, that made me stand taller in board meetings, that whispered, you belong in any room you walk into. Then came work. I poured myself into my job. Not as an escape, but as a proving ground. Late nights, extra projects, networking events I would have skipped before, and one crisp October morning, my boss called me into her office. You've been impressive this quarter, Simone, she said, sliding a leather folder across the desk. How would you feel about becoming our new regional marketing director? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This was the position I'd been gunning for since my first day at the company, and now it was mine. As I walked out of her office, folder in hand, I felt something inside me click back into place. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like Derek's discarded wife. I felt like Simone Williams. Capable, brilliant, unstoppable. That evening, Carmen popped open a bottle of champagne in celebration. To my girl, she grinned, raising her glass. Youngest regional director in company history. Derek who? I laughed, the sound unfamiliar on my own lips, but it felt good. It felt real. The next day, Carmen suggested we go shopping for a charity gala she'd been begging me to attend for weeks. I don't know, Carm. You're going, she interrupted firmly. Not to find a man, not to prove anything. You're going because you belong in rooms like that, and you need to remember it. So I let her drag me to a boutique downtown. When I stepped out of the fitting room in a sleek black gown that hugged my waist and fell in soft waves to the floor, I barely recognized myself. You look like power incarnate, Carmen whispered, her eyes misty, and for the first time since Derek left, I believed her. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down the dress. My hair was swept up elegantly, my makeup flawless, and around my neck sparkled a delicate diamond pendant I'd bought for myself as a quiet act of defiance. When I finally stepped into the ballroom, I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. But I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize for existing. I held my head high and smiled. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt like Simone again. The ballroom shimmered like something out of a dream. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across polished marble floors, and the soft hum of string instruments drifted over the quiet murmur of well-dressed guests. For a moment, I felt like an imposter. This wasn't my world. These weren't my people. But then I caught my reflection in a tall gilded mirror near the coat check, and for the first time in months, I didn't see Derek's discarded wife, that I saw Simone Williams. The black gown hugged my body perfectly, the diamond pendant at my throat catching the light with every movement. My hair was swept up in a sleek chignon. My lips painted a deep, confident red. Carmen was right, I thought as I squared my shoulders. I do belong here. At first. The evening felt almost normal. I mingled, sipped champagne, made polite conversation with colleagues I hadn't seen in months. There were no whispers about Derek, no pitying glances. For the first time in a long time, I was just me. That I was standing near the silent auction tables, tracing my finger absent-mindedly over the description of a Napa wine tour, when it happened. A gentle nudge at my elbow. "Oh, I'm so sorry," a warm voice said behind me. I turned, and for a moment, all the air left my lungs. He was tall, broad-shouldered but not intimidating, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at the edges as though it refused to be tamed. His eyes were a rich, earthy brown, the kind that seemed to look through you instead of at you, and his smile. It wasn't the kind of cocky grin I'd grown accustomed to seeing on Derek during his charm offensives. This smile was quiet, genuine. "That was entirely my fault," he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I wasn't looking where I was going." I found myself smiling, actually smiling, as I shook my head. "No harm done. I've done far worse at these kinds of events." He chuckled, and it was a sound that seemed to settle the nervous fluttering in my chest. "Alexander Mitchell," he said, extending a hand. "Simone Williams." His handshake was firm, confident but not overbearing. "Well, Simone Williams, let me apologize again for almost sending your wine flying." I laughed softly. "You're forgiven. This time." We fell into conversation with surprising ease. What struck me first wasn't his appearance, though he was undeniably handsome, or even the subtle air of confidence he carried. It was the way he listened. When I mentioned my work in marketing, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. He asked thoughtful questions about campaigns I'd run, strategies I'd found effective. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to impress me with his own accomplishments. And somehow, talking to him didn't feel like work. It felt effortless. Later, I would learn that Alexander was the CEO of a tech company worth billions, a man whose decisions could sway markets and whose name appeared in Forbes articles. But that night, he didn't lead with any of that. He was just Alexander. Funny in a quiet way, intelligent without being condescending, and so easy to talk to that an hour passed before I even realized it. The evening began winding down. He glanced toward the grand doors where guests were beginning to trickle out. "Simone," he said, his voice soft but steady, "would you allow me to take you to dinner sometime?" I hesitated. "I should probably mention," I began, twisting my fingers around the stem of my glass. "I'm recently separated. Going through a divorce, actually." Alexander's expression didn't falter. "That must be difficult," he said thoughtfully. "But it doesn't change the fact that I'd very much like to get to know you better, if you're open to it." Something in his tone, calm, patient, made my chest ache. It had been so long since a man had spoken to me without an edge of expectation. When we parted, he didn't ask for my number or press for details. Instead, he simply said, "I hope to see you again soon, Simone." The next morning, a bouquet arrived at Carmen's apartment. Sunflowers, sunflowers. Not the massive, overblown arrangements Derek used to send to Brittany, but a simple, cheerful bouquet. Tucked inside was a small handwritten note. "Thank you for a perfect evening. These reminded me of your smile. Alexander." I stared at the note for a long time, my fingers trembling, and then, for the first time in what felt like forever, I cried. Not from sadness, from the realization that I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Our first date was nothing like what I had expected. Alexander didn't show up in some ostentatious car meant to impress. Instead, he arrived in a sleek but understated sedan, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark slacks. his easy smile greeting me as though he were simply happy to see me. Not the image of me, not what I could offer, not what I could adorn his arm with. It was so different from Derek's approach in the early days, where even the smallest gesture felt like part of a carefully constructed performance. Alexander felt effortless. The restaurant he chose wasn't some five-star, reservation-only hotspot. Designed for Instagram posts, it was a small, family-owned Italian bistro tucked into a quiet corner of the city. The aroma of fresh basil and garlic hung in the air as the owner greeted Alexander warmly in Italian, clasping his hand with a familiarity that spoke of years of visits. "I come here when I want to remember what really matters," Alexander explained as we sat down at a corner table. "Good food, genuine people, real conversation." And conversation was exactly what we had. We talked about everything and nothing. Our families, our dreams, books we loved, places we wanted to visit someday. I told him about my childhood in a small town where summer meant scraped knees and fireflies. About my love for art that I'd buried under years of work and marriage. Alexander listened without interruption, his warm brown eyes fixed on mine. Not in the intense, overwhelming way that made me want to shrink, but with a quiet, steady attentiveness that made me feel like my words mattered. When I spoke of Derek, carefully, cautiously, Alexander didn't flinch. "I thought I had forever," I admitted softly, staring down at my wine glass. But it turned out he wanted something shinier, something newer. Alexander didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. "That must have hurt like hell," he said gently. I looked up, startled by the raw honesty in his voice. "It did," I whispered. "Then let's make tonight about you," he said. Not him. When he walked me to Carmen's door later, Alexander didn't lean in for a kiss or make any move to invite himself inside. Instead, he said, "I had a wonderful evening, Simone. I hope we can do it again soon." The flowers arrived the next morning, sunflowers. Not a massive, showy bouquet like the ones Derek used to send Brittany, but a simple arrangement tied with a satin ribbon. The note read, "These reminded me of your smile. Thank you for reminding me that even quiet evenings can be extraordinary." Alexander, I read the note 3 times before I let myself cry. Not out of sadness, but because I had forgotten what it felt like to be valued for who I was. Not for how I looked on someone's arm, or what I could do to make someone else's life easier. Our second date was more extravagant, but not in the way I expected. Alexander invited me for a helicopter ride over the city at dusk. "I wanted to share something beautiful with you," he explained as we soared over the glittering skyline. When I gripped the seat nervously at the height, he noticed instantly. "You're safe," he said, resting his warm hand over mine. "I've got you." By the time he kissed me, weeks later, it didn't feel rushed. It happened during a quiet evening at his penthouse. After we'd cooked dinner together, we laughed as I taught him my grandmother's mac and cheese recipe, and he showed me how to properly season a steak. Afterward, we took glasses of wine out to his rooftop garden, where jasmine and roses perfumed the night air. "I designed this garden as a meditation space," he told me softly. "A place to breathe when the world gets too loud." As we strolled past the blooms under the stars, Alexander stopped and turned to me. "Simone," he said quietly, "these past few weeks with you have been some of the happiest of my life." And then, carefully, almost reverently, he kissed me. It wasn't the fevered, public display Derek used to perform for social media. It was slow, gentle, like he was savoring the moment, and for the first time since my marriage crumbled, I felt cherished. Over the next few months, Alexander and I built something real. He surprised me with thoughtful gifts. A first-edition copy of my favorite novel, art supplies when I mentioned wanting to paint again, a weekend trip to his vineyard in Napa where we spent hours talking on the porch, sipping wine as the sun melted behind the hills. What I loved most about Alexander was that he never tried to erase my past on bad days, when grief washed over me in waves. He didn't grow impatient or jealous. He simply held me and said, "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." And somehow, with him, I believed it. The night of the charity gala, the air in my apartment felt electric. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring at the woman reflected back at me. She didn't look like the Simone who had cried herself to sleep in Carmen's guest room months ago. The Simone wore a custom black gown that draped like liquid silk, hugging every curve without apology. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and around her neck glittered a diamond necklace that Alexander had sent earlier that day. The card with it had been simple but powerful. You deserve to walk into every room knowing you're the most extraordinary woman there. For a moment, I touched the necklace lightly, my fingers trembling. Not because I felt nervous, because for the first time in a year, I felt invincible. The gala was held in one of the city's most exclusive venues, a sprawling hall filled with golden light and murmurs of wealth and influence. Alexander met me at the entrance, looking devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. When his eyes fell on me, something softened in his expression. "You look absolutely stunning," he said, offering me his arm. "Are you ready for this?" I smiled. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Inside, I felt the weight of eyes on us as we made our way through the crowd. But this time, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt empowering. Alexander introduced me to CEOs, philanthropists, politicians, never as his guest, never as his date, always as his partner. His hand rested gently on the small of my back, not possessive but steady, reminding me I belonged in every conversation, every room. And then I saw him. Across the ballroom, near the bar, stood Derek. He looked smaller somehow. His once perfect posture was slightly hunched. His suit tailored but somehow off, as though it didn't fit him the way it used to. Brittany clung to his arm, her expression bored as she scrolled through her phone. The sight didn't send a knife through my chest the way I feared it would. Instead, a calm, quiet strength settled over me. This is my life now, I thought, and he's no longer part of it. When Derek's eyes found me, I saw it happen. His smirk faltered. His gaze darted from my face to the necklace glittering at my throat, to Alexander's hand resting protectively on my back, to the way people turned toward us with familiarity and respect. For a brief, electric second, our eyes locked, and in his, I didn't see the smug superiority he used to wear like a second skin. I saw shock, and something else. Regret. Alexander leaned in. "You okay?" he murmured. "Perfect," I said softly, and I meant it. Derek didn't approach immediately, but I could feel his gaze tracking me across the room as Alexander and I mingled, laughing with old colleagues and making polite conversation with strangers. Every time I glanced in his direction, Brittany looked more irritated. At one point, she tugged on Derek's sleeve, whispering something sharp that he didn't answer. His eyes were still on me. It wasn't until Alexander stepped away to speak with the auction organizers that Derek finally made his move. "Simone." The sound of my name from his lips felt foreign now. I turned calmly. My glass of champagne balanced effortlessly in my hand. "Derek, can we talk?" His voice was low, almost desperate. "There's nothing to talk about," I said evenly. "Please, just a minute." Reluctantly, I let him lead me a few steps away from the crowd. "How are you?" I asked coolly. "How's Brittany?" He flinched slightly, his eyes flickering toward the diamond at my throat again. "I made a mistake," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. "The biggest mistake of my life." I tilted my head. "Did you?" I want you back, Simone." For a moment, I just looked at him, the man who had once been my entire world. The man who had kissed another woman across a candlelit table while I sat in my car outside, breaking silently in two. And I felt nothing, not anger, not sorrow, just a quiet, profound sense of peace. "Derek," I said softly, "I'm happy now, genuinely, deeply happy in a way I never was with you, even in our best moments." His mouth opened like he wanted to protest, but no words came out. "I hope you find that someday too," I finished. "Everything all right?" Alexander's voice behind me was calm but steady. He had returned, standing just close enough to make his presence known without posturing. "Everything's perfect," I said, turning to him with a smile, and I meant it. We walked away together, leaving Derek standing alone in the middle of the glittering room, his hand still half raised as though he couldn't decide whether to reach for me or let me go. Brittany glanced up from her phone, frowned, and muttered something I couldn't hear. As Alexander and I rejoined the crowd, I didn't look back. Derek left the gala before dessert was served, and I didn't see it happen, but Carmen told me later. Apparently, Brittany had grown tired of standing beside him, her sharp voice slicing through the hum of the room as she complained about how boring these events always are, and insisted they leave for some exclusive club across town. Witnesses said Derek's face was pale, his jaw tight as he followed her out, a man who looked less like he was walking alongside his partner and more like he was trailing. Behind a storm that I didn't see any of it, I didn't care to. A week later, whispers began to drift my way. Not that I was listening for them, but people had a way of bringing news to your door whether you asked for it or not. It started with a colleague from my old social circle, who leaned in conspiratorially during a networking brunch. "Did you hear?" she said, eyes wide with mock sympathy. "Brittany's been seen with that high-profile divorce attorney from Kensington. You know, the one with the private jet." I blinked, unsure how to respond. "Oh," I said finally, and excused myself to refill my coffee. The stories kept coming. Brittany was spending more and more time at her gym's juice bar, always in conversation with the same tall, silver-haired man who owned a string of law firms. The lavish gifts Derek had showered her with began appearing on resale apps, posted under anonymous usernames but unmistakably hers. The designer handbags, the diamond tennis bracelet, even the silk scarf he'd once photographed tied around her neck during a beach getaway. And Derek, he looked thinner now, tired. His real estate business, once thriving under my careful support, was floundering. A few mutual acquaintances whispered that he'd missed 2 major closings in a row. "Can you believe it?" someone asked me over cocktails one evening. "He used to be the golden boy. Now he can't seem to hold it together." I sipped my drink and said nothing. A month after the gala, I ran into Derek by accident. It was at a coffee shop downtown, one I used to frequent on my way to client meetings. He was seated near the window, hunched over a laptop with dark circles under his eyes. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. The man I'd married had always carried himself with a certain easy confidence, his shirts pressed, his smile sharp and charming. This Derek was unshaven, his hair unkempt, his suit rumpled like he'd slept in it. When he looked up and saw me, his face froze. "Simone," he said softly, as though speaking my name hurt. "Derek," I nodded politely, stepping up to the counter to order. Can we talk?" he asked, rising halfway from his chair. "I don't think there's anything left to say." "Please," he said. I hesitated. Then Saturday his hands trembled as he wrapped them around his paper coffee cup. "She's gone," he said finally. I raised a brow. "Brittany?" He nodded miserably. She left me for someone else." I said nothing, letting the silence settle between us like a heavy fog. "She said I wasn't ambitious enough, that I couldn't give her the life she deserved." His voice cracked. "But I tried, Simone. God, I tried." I tilted my head slightly. "I'm sorry that happened, Derek." He looked up, his eyes desperate. "I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. You were always there for me, supporting me, believing in me when no one else did." My chest felt strangely light. Once, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now, they felt hollow. "Derek," I said quietly, "you didn't lose me because you made a mistake. You lost me because you made a choice. Over and over again." He flinched. "I hope someday you learn the difference between being loved and being worshipped. They're not the same." I stood. "Take care of yourself, Derek." And just like that, I walked away. That night, as Alexander and I sat curled up on his penthouse balcony, sipping wine beneath a blanket of stars, I told him about the encounter. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. "Not for a second." Alexander brushed a kiss against my temple. "You deserve every ounce of peace you've found, Simone. Every bit of it." I smiled, resting my head against his shoulder. I finally believe that now. A year later, I stood barefoot in Alexander's rooftop garden. The late spring air fragrant with roses and jasmine. It was quiet here, peaceful in a way I had never known before. The city lights shimmered below us like scattered stars, but all I could see was him. Alexander was down on one knee, his warm brown eyes looking up at me with a softness that melted every scar I thought I'd carry forever. "Simone," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "You are the best part of every single day I've had since you came into my life. You've shown me that love isn't about grand gestures or social media moments. It's about laughter in the kitchen, late-night conversations, and knowing there's nowhere else in the world I'd rather be than by your side. He opened the small velvet box to reveal a ring so stunning it seemed to catch the moonlight itself. Will you spend the rest of your life with me? Tears blurred my vision as I pressed a hand to my lips. Yes, I whispered. Yes, 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I couldn't stop the flood of memories. Derek's face at the gala, pale and hollow when he realized the woman he'd once discarded had rebuilt herself stronger than ever. The desperate plea in his voice when he told me Brittany had left him. His once thriving business now crumbling without the quiet support I had given for years. And how, in that coffee shop, I had finally understood that I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Derek to suffer to validate my worth. I had already won the moment I chose myself. Our wedding wasn't a spectacle for anyone else's approval. There were no paparazzi-style photos or over-the-top hashtags. It was intimate, joyful, held in Alexander's garden under a canopy of flowers, with only the people who had truly stood by us. Carmen, my parents, a handful of close friends. When I walked down the aisle toward Alexander, my heart felt light in a way I didn't think it ever could again. During the reception, Carmen pulled me aside and grinned. "You know," she said, sipping her champagne, "I think Derek actually did you the biggest favor of your life." I laughed. He did. I admitted that if he hadn't betrayed me, I might never have discovered the difference between being wanted and being cherished, between being someone's option and being someone's choice. Months later, I heard through mutual friends that Derek's business had finally collapsed. Brittany had left him for a wealthy attorney she met at her Pilates studio, and Derek, he'd quietly sold his condo and moved out of the city. But I didn't dwell on it. His life was no longer my concern. Sitting on our terrace one golden afternoon, Alexander took my hand and kissed the inside of my wrist. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked gently. "Not really," I said honestly. "And when I do, it's with gratitude." Alexander raised a brow. "Gratitude?" I smiled. "Because losing him gave me the chance to find me. And finding me led me to you." I used to think closure came from confrontation, from making the person who hurt you realize what they lost. But I was wrong. Closure isn't about their regret, it's about your peace. It's about loving yourself enough to walk away and never look back. And sometimes the best revenge is no revenge at all. It's living your life so fully, so authentically, that you forget you ever needed to prove anything to anyone. Alexander, and I watched the sun set that evening. He leaned in and whispered, "You know, what I see when I look at you." I turned to him, smiling. "What?" "My forever." And for the first time in my life, I believed it.